Hello, can you hear me? Yes, super. I'm sorry, I cannot do it in Turkish. Günaydın. I came to Turkey about 31 years ago. I was 19 years old, and I was hitchhiking from Edirne to Istanbul to Ankara to Konya to Oludeniz, Pamukkale, and back up here. And I've been coming to Turkey in the last 30 years, on and off. About 7 years ago or so ago, I also had the honor of presenting here at your esteemed organization. I'm really proud to be back. Another reason I'm really keen to be back is a lot of innovation in learning is not happening in London or in Paris or in North America. It's happening in emerging markets like Turkey, like China, like India. And I'm really keen to learn a lot about what's happening here. Because I think a lot of the learning and development colleagues here are stretching things, stretching the barriers of what learning should be, and I'm really happy to learn about this. I joined Cognizant about 8 months ago. I'm now the Chief Learning Officer for Cognizant. It's a company of 280,000 people all around the world, so it's a big organization driving IT, driving things forward into the future. That's not so important about me. Maybe in my education part, I started with learning about philosophy. I just took on a bachelor in philosophy recently, because I believe myself also to be part of continuous education. And I think there's so much to be learning about philosophy of mind, how people learn, how people conceive ideas, how people make meaning in their minds, because it's really important for us as learning professionals. And I'll come to that later. I'd like to start with, I'd like everybody to applaud for a second. And I'll tell you why. Because every day we're working with all the people in our companies and are trying to upskill our colleagues. We're trying to give them skills, we're trying to give them behaviors, and I think it's a good moment to celebrate ourselves. Why don't you join me in celebrating ourselves together? Oh, isn't it lovely that we're the only department that can really help people like this? To give them new skills, to give them to see the light in their eyes, to give them new knowledge, to give them new behaviors. At the same time, there's also a challenge for us. I think learning is one of the only departments in our companies, I think next to HR, where there's no entry requirement. You don't need to have a degree to come and work in learning. If you work in the legal department, you need to have a degree in law. If you want to work in finance, you need to have some economics or finance degree. If you want to work in learning, you do not have to have a degree. And that's a good thing is that you have a lot of inflow of different people and different ideas into L&D. But the not so good thing is that everyone comes with their own background, and there's no baseline around learning. And that's why, for me, going back to theory, going back to history is so important. Often we don't know why we're doing things that we're doing. If you ask two learning and development people to go and talk to the same project, to deal with the same customer, they're always going to come up with completely different solutions. And that's what I'm talking about. It's good that they're coming up with different solutions, but it's also because there's no baselining. There's not enough reflection on the theory. When thinking about it, I've been reading a lot about the history of learning. Now, there's a difference between history of learning and history of training. History of learning started about 70,000 years ago, when we all left the savannas and started roaming the world. Our mind has not changed over the last 70,000 years or so. Now, training, on the other hand, has changed. Well, yes and no, but training only started roughly in the Industrial Revolution. Classes started around 1850, 1860s, when people in the industrialized countries were trying to get people up to speed, because you had, for instance, in England, where the Industrial Revolution started, you had these cotton factories, all these type of factories, and they were getting all kind of new people into their factories. They had farmers, they had lumberjacks, they had all these different professions, and they needed to train them. Now, the best way that they thought we could train them was to mimic a model that was ongoing for the last couple of hundred years or so, which was the education around the Bible. Because as of the 7th century or so, you had these Christian classes where they were bringing young kids together, and basically they were learning the Bible by heart. And you were not allowed to question the teacher, nor were you allowed to question the book that was taught, i.e. the Bible. And that was kind of the basic model on which education was started. Basically, you are stupid as a student, and the teacher is smart. And we're starting from a model where we can open your skull, we can pour in all kind of knowledge, we close your skull, and we assume something will stay. And you're not allowed to talk to your neighbor. And we have rows in the class, and you can only watch the teacher. Who has kids here? I guess I have 4 kids, and it's exactly the same still with my kids. Is it the same still with your kids, the educational system? No? A little bit? I think it's changing, but it's still pretty much the same model, no? Kids are supposed to be not very smart, and we're going to train them as if they know nothing. Now, basically, when we're starting around 1850, 1860, basically behavioralism came on board. That was the notion, because we needed to train citizens in basic skills. We needed to train them in basic writing skills, and we needed to train them in basic calculation skills. That was the driver we had. The teacher knew everything the student did not know. So we had basically a parent-child relationship. The parent is the teacher, the student is the child. And that perpetuated itself. Now, that's something that started, say, 170 years ago, based on premises that already started earlier. Basically, Industrial Revolution. Now, constructivism. I guess people here in learning and development, you've read up on your learning history. You have people like Vygotsky, and you have other people who found out 1960s, after the Second World War, basically, that actually people are not empty slates. You cannot just open a skull, pour in knowledge as if there's nothing in your skull. Not even with kids. Everybody has preconceived ideas. That's the notion of constructivism. You're always building on previous knowledge. If you're telling a child that the earth is round, the child will tell you that's not true. Because I'm looking at the sea here and it's completely flat. Dear teacher, I've already created a mind of the world where the world is flat. So part of constructivism is for the teacher, before the training starts, to make sense or to get a sense what the mental models are of the trainees. Now, the class and the test, that model comes from behavioralism. Constructivism added to that, and they said, let's do a test first, and then do the class, and then do the test. Because it's really important to capture people's knowledge before they start learning something, to check how far they are with knowledge. And think that we're starting to move towards personalization, because every person has a different map of the world. So every person needs to have a personalized drive towards the future. Now, pretty difficult to do, I think. Now, nowadays, we have concepts like learn to learn, my purpose, value-based learning, personalization, adaptive learning. All of these things are coming on board, and they're coming in the last piece, I can never say that, metacognitivism. So basically it's about, I think about how I think. I am self-aware. Because the next step after constructivism is, I am a creative agent. I not only have preconceived ideas of the world, but I'm aware of myself, about my past, my present, and my future. And their teacher don't teach me things, help me, because I am my best teacher. Now the challenge with things like learn to learn and those type of things, it's really hard for companies to embrace this if you're still thinking in a behavioralist model. Now, I told you that the behavioralism is class and tests, and then constructivism could be one application is test, class, test. Now in metacognitivism, it's first of all, I still do the test, class, test, but I have a confidence level check before the test or after the test. How well do you think that your answer is going to be right or wrong on that specific question? Or are you just winging it? Are you just guessing things? So these are dimensions of how you can create more awareness. Now I'd like you to reflect about yourselves, how much and which model are you really working in when you're designing and when you're developing learning? How much are we enabling our employees, our associates, to become self-professed learners? Who has Facebook? Everybody. Who does not have Facebook? Yes, I admire you. I have Facebook, but I deleted it from my mobile phone. And there's so much time I have, suddenly, to do everything I want to do, to read up and those type of things. But Facebook is all about sharing. Facebook is all about being self-aware, rightly or wrongly, about your opinions and things like that. And when people come into our companies, often we tell them, oh, you have to be self-professed learners. But we don't give them tools to actually do all of that. So I think this model for me is really important to drive self-directed learning. And my point is you cannot have self-directed learners when you have a parent-child methodology. We have adopted, since recently, and for me and all my team, I have about a team of 500 people in learning and development. This is mandatory learning. Jane Hart's book around modern workplace learning. Now, the notion is, maybe, let me another question. There was a question, and of course I'm sorry about, I don't understand Turkish, but there was a question about Google earlier. Now, how many classes did you go to in the last 3 months? Just raise your finger whether it's a 0 or a 1 or a 2. How many classes or e-learnings did you go to? I see 1 0, clear, very nice. You have, you have 10 classes you went to. 7, whoa, you're good stuff. And 2 classes? You had many classes, 2 hands? Whoa. Well, most often when I ask that question, I get an answer of 0 or 1. Because that's not the normal way of learning. And then I ask the question, how often did you went 3 days? Can you hear me? Yeah? How often did you went into Google in the last 2-3 days? And often you cannot count it on your 2 hands, no? Because that's exactly how you learn nowadays. It's continuous access to information and knowing what you want. And modern workplace learning is really addressing this. One axis talks about value for the organization. The other, is this fine? Yeah, let me try this. Yeah. Value for the organization, autonomy for the individual. And there we see courses on the left-hand side. There's nothing wrong with courses, but we have to be conscious that they're not going to be one size fits all, that they're not going to be doing everything for all of our people, neither in terms of value or in terms of autonomy, because somebody else is deciding on the timing, somebody else is deciding on the topics, on who's going to teach it, and all that jazz. Now, courses are anything that is instructional designed. It can be a course, can be an e-learning, can be a webinar, all of that jazz. Now, the next dimension is resources. And that's really the notion of knowledge management. How do you access stuff? And that's exactly what I meant with accessing Google just now. That's how people learn. Now, if you can combine those two really well, courses and resources, then you're talking about modern training. Not modern learning, modern training. And then social collaboration, personalized learning, that's all about modern learning. Because if you don't know how to ask Google, you're asking your neighbor. And these two things are the most common things that how people learn, just-in-time type of learning. Personal learning is all about coming to events like this, but also being asleep, because during your sleep, you're reconnecting all your synapses, and that's the best way of learning. There's a great philosopher, John Dewey from North America, who was actually doing a lot of work on learning, and what he said is learning never happens during the event. Learning happens afterwards, in your reflection about the event. Now, that's an important notion for me, because that actually means we shouldn't care whether we do a class or an e-learning or give a book to people, because if this is true, what John Dewey said, the reflection is more important than the event. And that's something for us to think about. So how do you combine both the reflection and the event? This is a survey we did. Cognizant, big company, 280,000 people, and we did an event. 65% of our population is Gen Z or Gen millennial and younger. So lots of Gen Zs. And we asked people the question: how do you prefer to learn? And this is what they came up with in this order. And you could see that e-learning, for instance, is number 5, and classes is number 8. Because very often we in learning and the training professionals, we think that learning and training is the best thing the best thing there is. But actually, this is not how our people want to learn. Now, this is not the full story. This is how people profess they want to learn. This is a bit like the learning styles. People think they are more an auditory learner or kinesthetic learner, but there's no research that proves any of this. So this is about preferences, how people think themselves they learn better or they interact better with learning. But I think this tells us something. This gives us some indication of how we should provide services as learning professionals to the world. And I'm now in a lot of soul searching. How much are we enabling knowledge sharing within our teams and across our teams? And how do we enable better communication between managers and their subordinates and team leaders and so on and so forth? Because continuing the way we have been doing things is not really going to work. Things are changing. Last time I came here to Istanbul was about 7 years ago during the last TEGEP meeting. And the city looked completely different now. I came in through the new airport yesterday, and it took me a couple of hours to get into the city. But I think a lot of new buildings and new drivers. So, and I'm sure the same is happening for your companies. Things are changing dramatically, and our industries will continue to change, and to accelerate our change. Now, how do we change as learning and development professionals is my question. Knowing that all the research stopped around 1970, all the L&D research stopped around 1970s. ADDIE, who likes ADDIE? Now it's dangerous when you raise your hand. Addy is 1950, you know? That's already 70 years old. Nowadays, there's many new ways of how, and also in the meantime, through the IT companies, we found out about Agile. How do you develop in an Agile fashion and on a waterfall fashion and so on and so forth. Also what I said earlier about learning styles is there's no research that proves that learning styles are actually true. You might think that you're an auditory learner, but actually how you learn or how your brain is dealing with learning is completely different than what you think how you try to learn painting by listening to somebody. You know, painting being a very kinesthetic type of activity, you cannot learn by reading a book. It has to be a combined notion of all of these skills. In any case, a lot of things are changing. And then I have this notion, how do we stick to the past or how do we move towards the future? How do we drive from a model where trainers are more important to a model where the employees are more important? I don't like, I'm not a great believer in corporate curricula where somebody at headquarters decides that if you're a project manager level 2, then this is the mandatory track you should follow. I'm more in favor of saying, if you're a level 2 project manager, this is what we mean by good. This is the end station. And how you navigate towards that end station, we leave that up to you because we treat you as an adult, as a professional. So the how we give freedom, but the what is fixed. Also, of course, there's lots more just-in-case learning happening nowadays than just-in-time. I mean the other way around. Just-in-time, the Google example is all about just-in-time. And often we're training people for just-in-case. You all know about Ebbinghaus forgetting curve. Hermann Ebbinghaus, 1880 roughly, and he found out how quickly people forget things when they're memorizing random things. It's like after 20 minutes, you would have forgotten already 40% of what you heard. Imagine that everybody has to go and do this presentation, the one I'm doing now for you. If you have to do that presentation immediately after this session, I think immediately after you'll probably be able to do a reasonable job if you paid a little bit of attention. But already half an hour later, your knowledge of this presentation will have gone eroded already quite a bit. Unless you're taking notes, unless you are actively reflecting on what I'm saying. So learning is an active thing. How do we change from a push model to a pull model? And I'll talk to you about that in a second. How do we move from training to knowledge? How do we move from inputs to outputs? How do we move from a notion where we don't care whether we train people, but we care what people know? How do we move to a model where we as learning professionals just get out of the way and let learning happen? That we don't have to control the learning that's happening in people. What are we enabling our employees on? Given that our employees might be sometimes smarter than we are, given that our businesses might be moving so fast, are we enabling people to go beyond the knowledge? Now, remember what I said about metacognitivism, the new way of learning, where self-awareness, self-directedness, and those dimensions are so important, where learn to learn is important, where my purpose is so important, and where that's a challenge from the behavioralist notion. I think often we're so focused on training people about knowledge. And knowledge is all about the past. Knowledge is about behaviors, things that people need to know, basically. But we often forget about people, about giving people a moral compass. The biggest focus I have now in the company is a focus on curiosity. And all my campaigns are now going around, be curious. Because at the end of the day, you don't need me as a learning leader. If everybody is curious, if everybody is inherently curious, then basically I don't have a job, and I'll be very happy with it. And curiosity for me means three things. First of all, am I curious about the world? Am I curious about my customers? Am I curious about the industry I'm working in? But also the second piece, am I curious about the other person? I think there was an earlier exercise where you had to look each other in the eye and hug each other. That's for me curiosity at the second level. Am I curious about somebody? Can I look in your eyes? And can you help me to grow? And can I help you to grow? Because none of us is operating at 100% of our capacity. We all have some hidden blocks, hidden limiting things in ourselves that prevent us from full growth. We always have some parent who told us when we were 5 years old that we're not a great sports person, or that we're not good in math, or something like that. Or a teacher said, your history is never something for you, type of thing. Now, remember, it's not only about me as an individual, but all the employees that we're dealing with have the same limiting factors. What if we as learning professionals go beyond the stuff that we teach people and also teach them about overcoming their personal limitations and really let them rise out to the future? And I think that's the third level of my curiosity is curiosity about myself. How am I going to overshadow my own potential? Now, how do I put that in training? That's the hard thing. If you're in a behavioralist model, it's really hard. If you want to move into a metacognitive model, which I think we owe to people in the 21st century, then we need to think about how do we teach people what train to train is. What is the difference between adult education and child education? Do we know about it as learning and development people, and can we transfer that to our people somehow? An interesting piece of information that came from the World Economic Forum, where already in 2022, active learning is the second most important skill that people have. 2022, that's only 3-4 years from now. And you have a lot of really bright people there working. So let's assume this is close true. What are we as learning and development people are going to do about this? How are we going to help our people to become more active learners? I don't know your organizations, but in my organization, we're doing now a lot of soul searching. What do we have to do differently to train people? And to give, not only train people, but also give people different ideas to create a pull, to make people curious, so they're lifelong learners. Because, let's face it, that's not a skill that has been taught when we were in school, how to be a good learner. We were told as if we could open our skull, we pour in some knowledge, and that's the rest of it. I think a very important differential for me is the difference between training and learning. For me, training is really good when you're getting up to speed. That's really good for new hires, or when you're new in a role. I call that education. You first learn, then you do. Now, I think 99% of the people here are going to be longer than 2-3 years in a role. And that's why you only had 0 or 1 training, or 1 person 7. But most of us have 1 or 0 trainings in the last 3 months, because we don't train. Seasoned people don't train by going to classes. You train yourself, you upskill yourself by going onto Google and by asking your neighbor, those type of things. But how do we as learning and development accelerate that? That learning while doing. This is the model that we're using at Cognizant. Open, Wonder, Learn is our slogan, and that links to curiosity. We're using the building blocks of modern workplace learning, and we're focusing heavily on technology. I'll share a little bit more like this. I'm a great believer in marketing. I think the beauty of all the things we're doing, we have so many beautiful things that we're creating, but often we don't have enough marketing power in our learning and development groups. And that's why I would encourage all of you to kind of spice up, if you're not doing this already, the beautiful things you're having, so you can kind of launch this with much more marketing power in your organizations. I need to move on a little bit. How do I? Okay. Can I have 2 more minutes? Yeah. When we spoke about resources, the stuff, this is something we launched 6 weeks ago. This is what I call my learning studio, which is a place which have access to stuff. You want to learn about behavioral skills, you want to learn about technology, this is a place where you go to. There's no push, there's no courses. You have access to video here. You have access to self-study learning materials, to YouTube, to books, and so on and so forth. There's no manager involved, there's no approvals involved, you just get on with it. You want to create your own video. You were talking about video earlier, I think, no? You want to create your own video? Great. Create it and upload it in the system so other people can view it. Now, within 6 weeks, we have over 500,000 hits to this site. So basically, this tells me something. The moment you create something for this young population, they automatically come to it. And we get out of the way as learning folks. We just create this environment, and for the rest, we let people happen. And interestingly, now the next version of this site is we're going to create champions in all of our businesses who will manage subsites of this. Please upload your own stuff on this, the books you read, the articles you know, the YouTube videos you have, celebrating freeware, so that everybody can benefit from this. This is some of the prizes we have been winning. Future Value L&D, I'll just stop here. Oh, this is maybe an interesting one. Do you know this site? Will robots take my job? Ever heard of this? Go online. Will robots take my job? Everybody's a bit afraid of this, no? And then when you type training and development specialists, what do you think will come out? Will robots take our job? Yes? Have it? Who says what? Actually, no. The chance that robots is taking up our job is only 1%. So that means we're not off the hook. We still have a lot of work to be doing before the computers are in there. But I hope you're with me to move into the 21st century and to start thinking, I think more. And I don't know you, because I'm making some assumptions. I know that Turkey and China and India are much further ahead already than thinking in the UK, than thinking in France, and thinking in North America about learning. But I still say, keep on stretching yourself. Relearn how we learn, how we as professionals learn. How much do we know about learning theory, about learning philosophy? How much do we speak language? That business comes to us not because we're order takers, but we are really deep specialists. How do we retraining our trainers? How do we adopt a startup mentality within our organizations? And so on and so forth. So that's something I wanted to leave with me. Go and, I say go and get them. And think about it. In the 21st century, how metacognitivism, how learning to learn, how we can embrace this self-awareness for our people. Yeah? Is there time for questions, or maybe not, maybe later? I'll leave it to you. Yeah? Thank you very much.